Welcome everyone to this session of the International Black Summit's podcast interview series. Welcome. This is an interview series that we created to provide an opportunity for both participants, current and past participants, and people who have never heard about us to experience and learn a little bit about the International Black Summit. In this series, we interview current and past participants and facilitators of the International Black Summit. And the International Black Summit is an organization that was created in 1991. And our purpose is to provide an opportunity for participants to bring into being their vision for the Black community and the world. Welcome, I'm Grace Lawrence.
And my name is Glenn Greenidge, and I'm going to read the Declaration of the International Black Summit, which was created back in 1991 at the first International Black Summit. The Declaration of the International Black Summit. We declare ourselves, our community, and all communities whole and complete. There is nothing to do except be. We assert that we are responsible for generating community as possibility and distinction. We listen for and grant being to the possibility and creation of unpredictable results. Our conversation of, about, and for those of African descent is one of power, self-generation, abundance, responsibility, unity, and integrity with the possibility of being. We stand for the expression of our spirituality, ending the murders of our men, women, and children, building economies responsible for funding our community, maintaining wellness of being in our bodies, providing human services, establishing nurturing relationships, altering the conversation of who we are in the media, empowering our youth. We declare that our community manifests itself in the world as a contribution in the transformation of the universe. Atlanta, Georgia, October 7th, 1991, August 14th, 2022. We'll start with a moment of silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
Grace, you're welcome.
Thank you. We have, for those of you who have listened to some of our previous podcast sessions, you may have heard that on occasion we have ended the session with the Declaration of the International Black Summit. This is the first time that we're starting our session of really wanting to just ground ourselves in the Declaration of the International Black Summit that was created back in 1991. So thank you for that, Glenn.
You're welcome.
And tonight we will be interviewing a facilitator of the International Black Summit, somebody who has been involved in the summit for many, many years. And I'm just going to read about her, read her biography here, which I think many people will find extremely interesting. So we're interviewing Lorraine Warren, also known as Dr. Rain. And Dr. Rain, her career as a facilitator, educator, and trainer in peace building, dialogue, and conflict mediation has spanned over 20 years and has taken her to over 100 countries around the world, which include the continents of Africa, Asia, North America, South America, and Europe. She was honored with the distinction Legacy International Humanitarian Award in acknowledgement of having directly impacted the lives of over 34,000 youth, and the Josephine Scout Wollman Fuller Award by Psychologists for Social Responsibility, recognizing her outstanding contributions to the advancement of peace and social justice. Dr. Rain is currently developing a project called Creating a World That Listens, in which she takes red chairs to public places and provides a peaceful space in which she simply listens to the issues and concerns of everyday people, Often, she asks them to respond to the question, what would you say if you knew the world would listen? She has had profound conversations with all races and ages of people from 6 to 93 years of age. This project was inspired by her research in Rwanda, interviewing survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Many of the survivors stated that over 800,000 lives could have been saved if the world had listened. She believes that the solutions to any community's problems lay within that community. In other words, it's all in the circle. Dr. Rain's first summit was in 1992, Highland Park, Michigan, and she joined the adult facilitator body that same year. She has held several accountabilities within the summit body, which include coordinator, communicator, administrator, summit historian, international enfoldment manager, host, and leadership council. Dr. Rain was designated a senior facilitator by the original 5 facilitators of the International Black Summit and has served as a facilitator for several years, living her life through the declaration, questions, and distinctions of the International Black Summit. Dr. Rain holds an MA PhD in community, liberation, eco-psychologies, master's degrees in spiritual psychology and higher education administration. She completed her undergraduate degree at one of the nation's first historical HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, which was Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome Dr. Lorraine Warren, to join us here in our virtual studio. We're really looking forward to this conversation. Dr. Rain, if we can have Dr. Rain spotlighted to join us on screen.
Rain, you can start your video and unmute yourself. There you go. Go ahead.
Okay, and if she can be spotlighted.
Yes. There she is.
There she is. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you. Are you calling yourself Grace, Jackie? Jackie Grace?
Jackie Grace. Well, there are 2 Jackie Lawrences in the summit, as we know, and so I'm the one known as Jackie Grace or just Grace.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's something about the summit. We have been known to shift our names over the years.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Absolutely.
That's true. That's true. Well, welcome, welcome. I just want to, one of the things that we first typically ask people when we start these sessions is to just get a sense of your introduction to the International Black Summit. Like, what was your first exposure? We know that your first summit was in 1992. Was that your first exposure to the summit? Like, how did you end up getting involved?
I'm laughing because some people know this, they know the answer to this question because I've shared it a few times. But first, I want to acknowledge my relationship with the people here. And as you were both speaking, it's just so many stories flooded through my mind of times that I've had with Tyra, with Nancy, with Petal, with Latasha Brown, Brian at this last summit, Joy. If I don't know you well, then you're new to the summit. But those people who've been around, Jackie Grace, Glenn, oh my goodness, I could tell some stories about the International Black Summit. So I wanted to acknowledge the journey we've all had together. It's been profound, and I really love all of you in different ways. But getting back to my first experience of the summit, I was actually invited to the very first summit. I didn't remember that. I wasn't present to what it was. And at that time in my life, I had a attitude. It was just like, whatever. And it was Byron Johns and Rosa Waldron and a few other people who kept saying, oh my God, you should come to the summit. You would be great for the summit. You should come. And I was like, no. And then they kept asking me, and I said, well, what is it? And I said, why would I want to sit in a room full of Black people for a whole weekend? And I don't think I said Black people. And they kept bugging me and asking me, and I started saying, look, if you keep harassing me, I'm gonna end this friendship. We couldn't block your phone, but literally I said, I'm blocking you. You know, don't talk to me. This is harassment. Do not call me. And so it was the night before that summit. The bus was gonna take off from New York going to Highland Park, Michigan. And I think Rosa gave up. I was like, don't call me anymore. And Byron Johns called me and he asked me to come to the summit. And I said, no, Byron, do not call me again. This is harassment. Do not call me again. And when I hung up the phone, I was just overwhelmed with this profound, profound sorrow and grief. I just felt this overwhelming sorrow. And at that time, my pride, I was like, well, I'm not gonna call him. I just started praying, God, please let him call me back. Please just let him call me one more time, please. And the phone rang and he called and he said, you know, if anyone knows Byron, he's tenacious, right, Glenn?
Yes, he is.
He said, I'm gonna ask you one more time. Will you come to the International Black Summit? I said, okay, I'll come. And hung up the phone. And I started running around the room, packing my bag, getting ready. I was so excited. And I had no idea what I was coming to, but I just know it was just something in me was like, got, woo, triggered. That's a distinction. So that's how I came to the summit the first time.
Well, thank goodness to Byron for being so tenacious.
And Rosa, it was like, you know how you have to tenderize the meat, keep beating it. I was well tenderized, okay? So
do you recall what it was that had you be so, you know, because you said, am I really going to spend this weekend in a room full of Black people? Now it's like, you can't take me out of this room full of Black people. Don't send me. You know, I just want to stay here. I mean, what was behind that resistance?
Well, for people here who've done the Landmark Forum, I said the same thing about the Landmark Forum. Why would I want to sit in a room with a bunch of white people? I think it was some things that were conscious and some things that were unconscious. And at the time, I was working in corporate settings, very few Black people. And I had started going once a week on the weekends to Harlem. I would just go to Harlem and walk around. And if I could describe it to you, I had a longing for a Black community. You know, I had a longing for my community. And I wasn't raised in New York. I was just living there, working there. I had worked different places around the country. And I think I must have experienced some trauma. And some of those stories that I had about Black people were in my subconscious. And I was afraid. You know, I was afraid. I was never, I've never, any community that I've been in, been regular. You know, I've always stood out a little bit.
That is true.
From the crowd. You know, so I you know, growing up, I wasn't really in my high school and junior high school. I was put in like a special group for accelerated learners, and we were like special, you know. So it was just like a whole different school within the school. So it was like these girls who were doing stuff that I wasn't doing, you know, and smoking in the bathroom. I was like, oh my God. And I got bullied a lot in school. So I think I had gathered up a lot of trauma. I was raised in Florida until I was about 9 years old. And then we moved to Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, at the height of gang wars. And so I saw a lot of, they would say, you got to get home early from school today because there's a funeral. And when they had the gang funeral, it was thousands of gang members marching through the street. you know, and being a young kid, it was like traumatizing to me. And so basically when in my high school, I just made a path from home to school. Couldn't play with the other kids because it wasn't like what I was raised with. When I was raised in Florida, I think from first grade to junior high school, I may have had one fight, and it wasn't really a fight. It wasn't nothing, you know. And then, you know, the kids there, it was just different. They didn't respect the adults. So I think it was accumulation of internalized trauma.
So Rain, what was it like being at that first summit in Highland Park? What was it for you?
Well, that first summit was a turning point in my life. You know, I mark it as one of those turning points in my life. For me, it was a powerful healing experience. And if you were at that summit, you probably will remember the woman who cried. Because I think the first time I started crying was when I walked into the Thursday night event. And it was about 300 Black people. And I walked into the room and everybody was so beautiful. And I just started crying. And I cried all night. And then I walked into the summit room, I was crying again. I was just crying and crying and crying. And the sensation I had in that summit was as if my skin was turned inside out. That's how raw I felt. I was present. I was listening to every word that was said. I was listening to all of the shares, and I just cried. I don't even remember eating, but I remember throughout it was Thursday night event, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, just crying myself to sleep. I shared a room with a couple of women who we were friends in New York, you know, with the Padag and Landmark. And they would go out after the summit to hang out and party. I didn't go. I just laid in my bed crying. And they didn't even ask me what was wrong. I guess they figured out. I don't remember them asking me. And I do remember two things. Valerie Andrew. Y'all know Valerie, right?
Yes, we do.
I was in the bathroom just crying my eyes out. And she was actually in my summit group. She was one of the people in my summit group. And so she came up to me and she said, "Are you well?" And I looked up at her, I said, "Yes." And then I went right back to crying. And that summit, it was like all kinds of stuff happened at that summit. It was dynamic. But there was one instance in the summit where this beautiful, tall, he's at least 6'4", maybe more, chocolate Black man. He stood up and he was weeping. I mean, he was doing the ugly cry with the nose and everything. And I was like shocked because I'd never seen a Black man be that vulnerable. And he was weeping and weeping. And he said, "All I ever wanted was my mother to tell me that she loved me." And I was just like so moved. And the women were walking up to him saying, "I love you, I love you." I was like, oh God, you know? And if that wasn't enough, you know, I literally at that summit, I think I saw a young man's body realign itself. When he stood up and he was just sharing about how he didn't feel like he was good enough. You know, he said, "If I came home and I got a B, my mom said, 'Why didn't you get an A?' He said, 'I feel like it's nothing I could do, you know, that make me to be satisfied.'" And at one point in the summit, I remember her calling him up to the front of the room. And you know how some people stand, their shoulders sort of like hunched over? I literally saw his mind straighten because she acknowledged him in front of the whole room. And so, you know, whoever was at that summit, there was many, 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 many moments that were so, I could tell a couple of more stories. There were many, many, many moments that were so spiritual, so dynamic. I felt like an energy and a presence in the room. And at one point, do you want me to tell another story? Am I getting too long?
Well, let me just give folks the context who may not have ever attended. So Thursday night is the opening event where whatever the host city is, they conduct an event to invite everybody, to welcome them to the city and acknowledge the city and acknowledge the work that's going to start. And then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are the days that you're actually in the annual summit event. And part of that is that you get into groups. So you get into groups of 5 and you work with that group of 5 like a support group. And some of the groups actually still maintain communication 15, 20 years afterwards.
Mhm.
So these groups are bonding as you go through as Rain said, the spiritual aspects and the individual transformations that incur and the enlightenment that occurs inside of the weekend. So certainly, if you'd like to share another event from the first summit.
Actually, I actually have a question
Okay.
related to that first summit event, because I think, there's a lot that we want to cover with you tonight. And so I do want to make sure that we have the time to get to all of it. One of the things that you said in this first summit event was that you chose out of that first summit event to join the facilitator body, to become a facilitator and do the training to become a facilitator of the International Black Summit. And for those who are listening, there are all kinds of opportunities to become involved in the organization. You can become, you can join the facilitator body to be trained to facilitate the sessions. You can join and participate in the leadership body, in the administration. There are a variety of teams. You can be part of the Sunday Summit Share team. Glenn and I are part of the podcast team. So there are different teams that you can become a part of. But you chose to become a part of the facilitator body out of that annual summit event. And so just curious, what drew you to the facilitator body?
I don't think that for me, it was necessarily like I chose. I think Spirit chose me. I just found myself in the facilitator body. I think that was the first summit when they opened it up, because originally it was the first 5 facilitators: Kathleen Copper, Robin Randolph, Perry Parks, who are all still here with us, and the 2 ancestors, J. Kenneth Young and Anthony Randolph. They were the original 5. And I think that was the first year that they opened it up, saying, well, who's interested in being in a facilitator body? And, I said yes.
Okay. So so you just found yourself, you just found your body moving.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, at that time, I was a facilitator, a trainer. I travel all over the world being with groups of people. I was also a course leader for New York Youth at Risk, which is an organization that does similar work. They used to do, with the Breakthrough Foundation, the Landmark Forum distinctions with young people at risk youth, but Youth at Risk through Claudette Faison developed their own distinctions. So I was a course leader with New York Youth at Risk as well.
Okay, got it.
New course leader with Youth at Risk.
Thank you. So I guess related to joining the facilitator body and then having been a facilitator of the summit, of the International Black Summit for, many years now, one of the things that we like to ask, particularly facilitators, but also past participants who were never facilitators, are about your use of the distinctions in your life and in your career. So when you look at the tools of the International Black Summit, the distinctions of the International Black Summit, do you find that you have certain favorite distinctions or favorite tools, and how do you use them? Like how have you found that you use them in your personal life or in your career, the work that you do?
Let me look a moment. I want to go back to that first summit. because it was so powerfully facilitated. And for me, it was what I had been looking for in the Black community that I grieved and longed for, that was present. Everybody was there. You name it, in the Black community, everybody was there. And I think that we were sharing with each other from behind the curtain. Like you see someone walking down the street, or you see someone, but you don't really know what's really going on with them. And that's something you got a sense of what was going on with people, whether they were doctors, lawyers, you know, homeless, you know, whatever. Everybody in the community was in that room.
Can I just ask you a question? When you say everybody was there at that first event, what does that mean?
Mothers, fathers, uncles.
Oh, all different aspects of the community.
Daughters,
okay, gotcha.
Sons, professional people. Some people who were youth, students, some people who millionaires, poor people, the scale of the breadth of the Black community. And
we had some hustlers and there are
ex-cons, like everything was there.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so a part of being in the facilitator body is making a commitment to live your life through the declaration, the questions, and the distinctions of the International Black Summit. And so also when you're in a facilitator body, you're in a group, and that's what you do. In those early days of the facilitator body, I know in my group, we literally met once a week. For years. Mm-hmm. For years. And so we experienced life with each other. Like anything that happened with me, my group knew about it, and then the facilitator body knew about it. And also you had a chance to just grow, to bump up against your strengths and your weaknesses. In the facilitator body is just like one big happy family. You know, you fight, you fuss, you love each other, you support each other when support is needed, all of that, but all inside of the clearing, which was one of my favorite distinctions, inside of the clearing of the International Black Summit. So we used it in our lives. If you were experiencing something on your job, facilitate a group, talk about it, process it through one of the distinctions. The declaration is something I read morning and night to clear myself and just stand in that declaration, almost like a prayer that I uttered in the morning and at night before I went to bed. No out there. No out there. That was one that Lennar Bragg really brought forward in the summit, that anytime I see something out there that's triggering me, upsetting me, or even maybe not triggering or upsetting me, it's a reflection of what I have over here. Like that whole notion of when you point that one finger, it's three pointing back at you. And so then you got to reflect and look back at yourself, like what's going on over here with me that I'm making that assessment over there. So we rigorously work those distinctions, rigorously, until now, I almost feel like, you know, I have to think about it. It's incorporated into my life, into who I'm being.
So Ray, you gave a couple. So you gave clearing, you gave no out there, and was
bumping up against.
And so these are distinctions that are used inside the International Black Summit. So these are part of the tools to keep people present in their life, so that because sometimes we get off track, and these distinctions, these tools are used for us to kind of get back on track and be present to what life is actually informing us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So go ahead, Rain. So you're in the facilitator body. You were in a weekly conversation to clear yourself, to clear any upsets, any things that were going on in your life that were, you know, that you were agitated by, that you might have been upset by, or just were, and noticing again is another one of the distinctions. So you may have noticed something inside of those that bumping up against and so forth, and you had an opportunity to speak it inside of these tools and distinctions. Now, to some folks, it may sound like therapy. Say a little bit more about why it's not that and it's something different.
Because we say it's not that.
Okay.
It's not therapy. It's therapeutic.
Therapeutic.
Definitely it's therapeutic,
yes.
But it's not therapy.
Yeah.
No one's got well, we do have some therapists who are part of the summit, but that's not where they're coming from. We're using the distinctions and the tools and our being with each other. So if you can imagine in your life, like period, think about all the stuff you went through the last year, that you have a group of people that you can talk to every week and clear. And it's not necessarily a breakdown. It could be like, wow, I'm celebrating, I got a new job. Right. And now I have all of this money and I've never had that before. So now I'm bumping up against like, whoa, my family who's saying, well, who does she think she is? She's got money now. Give me some. So it comes in so many different forms and so many different ways. So it could be a joyous, or I'm getting married for the first time. And then, so what do I do with that? Or I'm a minister now, and this is what I'm dealing with as a female minister in my congregation. Like whatever comes up in your life, you have a place to be with the declaration of the International Black Summit, the purpose of the International Black Summit, some of the distinctions. We might say in our group, so what have you been noticing about who you've been being in your life with your son? You have a teenage son that you're raising. What have you noticed? And as we go through the year with our conversations, lo and behold, profoundly, those conversations that showed up in our group is a microcosm for the world, because those are the same things that the people who come to the summit might bump up against. And so then we've cleared ourselves over a year so we can best facilitate someone if you dealt with having loss in your family. There was one year that it's just like everybody had some profound loss. I mean, one person had so many people who transitioned in their family. And we got to the summit, and the first share in the room, first time at the summit, I've had so many loss. Boom, that's your facilitator, we got you, like that, or whatever may be happening. We've had people who have had, I'll just say that, I ain't gonna tell everybody's business now. But if you could think about something anyone could experience, if you have a facilitator body of so many people, someone has experienced that, or we've had a chance to clear about that and distinguish things. And when you get into that space of the summit, it's a space that can hold all of it. It could hold anything.
Can hold anything, absolutely.
Hold anything,
like
anything. There's a distinction that there's no right way to be. So with my first summit, crying, it wasn't nobody like coddling me. They made sure I was all right, but that was how I was being, crying. People come from different faiths. So you might have, oh my goodness, I'm not gonna say no names, but you might have someone who puts up an altar. And then you have people who like, we don't do altars in my clearing. That's not us. But they can both coexist in the same space. We have people who say, what's your religion? You have people who are Jewish. Yep, there are Black people who are Jewish. You have people who are Christian, Muslim. One time there's the person said, I'm a tree hugger. That's who I worship, nature. So it can hold all of that, because even though we might have the same skin tone, we are diverse. We come from a whole lot of different points of view, a whole lot of different experience. I was raised in the South. There are people who were raised in the North. You bumped up against that. People from California, people from Africa, Canada, like literally one woman we had stood up and said, I'm from Russia. yes, I'm a Black Russian and I ain't talking about the drink. You know, so all kinds of people can show up at the summit.
You know, it's interesting. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It really reminded me, had me actually go back to the purpose of the International Black Summit. When we say the purpose of the International Black Summit is to provide an opportunity for participants to bring into being their vision for the Black community and the world. And how I personally interpret that is it's all about empowerment. And so just to you know, when you talk about the group and having a group, and that group of 5 that you talk to every week, continuing to distinguish that from just having like a you know, some kind of therapy group or whatever, it being different than that, because the tools and the distinctions provide every group member with the tools to listen the conversation and provide the person speaking with an access to their own self-empowerment through the use of the tools. So it's not a standard conversation. So I just wanted that to be clear for anyone who's listening. These conversations are not the same as some kind of therapy group or that kind of thing. They're not that. They are very different, and foundationally they provide an opportunity for our self-empowerment and through us, the empowerment of our community.
Yes.
So Rain, as a facilitator, are you teaching people?
You know the answer to that.
Of course I do.
No.
And how would you distinguish it from a teacher?
I would say as a facilitator, you're being with people. Whatever they come to in the summit, we have an opportunity for people to share. And people come up to the mic and they just share whatever is present to them. Sometimes we have specific questions that they answer, but they answer it specifically to what's going on in their own life. And our job as facilitators, I'm listening to Anthony Randolph, one of the facilitator ancestors. Our job is to listen to people so intently that they can hear themselves. That you listen to people so powerfully and be with people so that they can hear themselves. So it's not really about a whole lot of processing or anything like that, but it's just listening. And a powerful place about the summit is we don't have a manual. So there are many places where they have those manuals and they're going word for word in that manual. They're following the guide, boom, they got this one, boom, they got this one. In the summit, we have our distinctions, the declaration, and we listen. And so sometimes it's even listening for what distinction is showing up in the room and facilitating through that. And so in my experience, and other facilitators may have a different experience, when I have facilitated in the summit, I feel empty. Like there's nothing there. I'm just a clear space, especially if I've done my clearing and my work. I'm sitting there and I'm just listening. And sometimes I say spirit says, this is what you need to say to that person. And Lorraine is saying, oh, I ain't saying that. No. There's no way am I saying that to that person. And then spirit says, this is what you need to say. And I might see other facilitators struggling and whatever. And I'm like, oh God. And for me, I start, it's like the heat gets turned up and I start burning. And then I have to get up and say what I'm given in my spirit to say to that person. And when I say it, that's when that person has a breakthrough. Or sometimes someone might stand there and share, and I'm standing nose to nose with myself. You know, they're sharing my story. And when I'm looking them in their eyes and listening, they get that we are like, it's something present. There's something present that's like, wow. And they get that I get them. And sometimes all it is for a person to be gotten. Like, wow, it's the first time someone really listened and got me. Now, if you have 30 or 40 facilitators, all of us have a different way of being. All of us have a different way of listening. All of us have different things that we might bring to the table. And so when you have that room, there's someone who can hear what maybe no other facilitator could hear. And so sometimes in the summit, you know, we maybe have 5 facilitators in front of the room, and the facilitators in the back of the room might hear it. The front of the room aren't hearing it. So they pass a note to the front of the room, and then boom, that person facilitates through that note, and then that person has a breakthrough. It's a very dynamic space. It's a very dynamic space. And so we listen.
You know,
we listen through the lens and the lens of the declaration and the distinctions. And there have been some times in the summit where there was nothing to say. It was just pure silence, pure silence. And in the next moment, people are cracking up, rolling on the floor, laughing. And then in the next moment, the room is in tears because someone has stood up and shared something so profound that everybody got like, wow, this is who we are. You know, this is who we are. And I would say one thing that got distinguished from me and many others in that summit in 1992 in Highland Park was that when you bring a group of people of Black African descent together, spirit will show up, period. And if we're being with each other, spirit is going to show up either in our speaking, in our dancing, in our just being with each other, like who we be. There's something that we bring to the world. I say that, and I've been in a lot of different communities. There's something that we bring to the world through who we are, through our bones and our ancestral blood that no other people on the planet brings. And many of us have participated in the summit, and these are highly trained people. You know, you list a transformational training and they done it. You know, Glenn led the 6th day for how many years? I'm like, I didn't know you did that, Glenn. So that's why he could be so zen. No, we do 10-day, some of us have done 10-day silent retreats.
Yeah.
I've studied with Malidoma ancestor, Elder Malidoma Some. You know, we crossed over the river to Byron Katie in the Landmark Forum. And some of us have studied with Barbara Ann Tier at the National Black Theater, and Fernando Flores, who came before Landmark. So highly, highly trained, highly educated people. And you don't necessarily have to done all that stuff. You know, sometimes that person who's the raw person off the street is just exactly what we need. I'm gonna give it to you like this from the streets, baby. And that's the person who stands up and needs to facilitate the room.
You know, the one thing I wanted to add to that is that as a facilitator, you're in the experience as well. So the process, so we're not leading anything, we're inside of the process with you as a participant. So the facilitators and the participants are gathering together and meshing this knowledge that's kind of bubbling up in the room. So we're listening, but we're also learning and gaining insight for ourselves, as well as the people who are participants, quote unquote, but we're all participants really when it comes down to we're just listening to space and directing that space.
When the spirit moves, you don't know who it will move on. And it's really a dance.
Yes.
It's really a powerful dance, because we've had someone who's not necessarily in the front of the room. We started to say there's no front of the room. Mm-hmm. Who stands up and they say something, and that's the thing that moves the space to the next level or wherever we need to go. Noel, hey.
So for anybody who's listening to the podcast or who's watching the video on YouTube, we actually do have a live audience with us. You can't see them on the YouTube video, but we have a live audience right now. So that's who Rain might be calling out to some of our participants. But I wanted to ask you, Rain, because we've talked about a number of the distinctions. We're not really getting into the distinctions right now, but we talked about bumping up against. I think people can begin to get a flavor of some of what these distinctions might mean and might do, but bumping up against. And we talked about clearing, both clearing as a space and clearing as to clear yourself, the verb. We talked about noticing, we talked about know out there, and we began to talk about, or you began to talk about, authentic listening. And so I want to actually ask you about authentic listening in terms of training in that as a tool of the summit, and then also you creating in your life a project around listening. Mm-hmm. So could you talk about that a little bit, the distinction, yes, authentic listening in the summit and your listening project?
Well, first, I will say to really begin to get a foundation and grounding into the distinctions of the International Black Summit, the prerequisite course is the place that you go if you've never been to the summit before, and that's led by Nancy Simmons and Teresa. Powerful space to get grounded in the distinctions, and even you're just hearing the distinction, you're going to start to see things about it. You're going to start to see things about all of the distinctions that were mentioned. Now, with my project, Creating a World That Listens, I have worked with communities for many years, even before I was at the summit, where that's what I taught: peace building, dialogue, leadership, and the core of the training was about listening. And when I went to get my doctorate, I went to Rwanda and I listened to the stories of genocide survivors. Now, to get into the space where I could really listen to some of those stories, I had to be cleared. And that's something I distinguished. It was very difficult to get a permit to do research in Rwanda. And it's a long story that I won't get into, but I spent a couple of months there before I got my permit, just being with people. Going back and forth to the office, they would say, oh, you got to come in, we have a question to ask you. They would ask the question, and then I said, can I have our permit? Not today, I'm not the one who's gonna. So that went back and forth. The place that I lived, in the morning, I heard there was a prison like off across the hill, and I heard the men singing, praise him, praise him, praise the Lord. And then they go, woo, every morning. And then I would hear, because I stayed in a Catholic rectory place, I would hear the priest singing hymns. Then in the evening, I would hear, it was a holiness church. I would hear them singing gospel music. So I was surrounded by this energy of, and at the time, I didn't know what was happening. I was surrounded by that energy. And I would walk the streets, the dust, and just be with people and talk to people, very careful not to ask them questions or appear like I was doing research, because that could get me kicked out of the country. But they did a fabulous job of clearing me. Because if I had gotten off that plane and interviewed people the next or the second day, I would have never have had the experience that I had. If I had not had the years of training with the International Black Summit, I would have never had the experience I had. If I had not done my own work, like really years of just being with people and distinguishing listening, I could have never have had that experience. And so what I did was sit with people and listen to their story, their entire story. And some of the stories were very profound, like many of the people I interviewed, they would start with saying, I was 9 years old. And, you know, my research was many years later, they were grown-ups, adults, but they said, I remembered everything vividly. I was young enough to remember, and I was small enough to hide. So a lot of them would tell me like they would hide behind a tree or they would climb a tree when the killers came, and they would watch as their whole family was killed. And many of the families would go to one compound. So it would be all these people in one house. They would, you know, safety and being together. And that's how they were killed. And the kids climbed the tree and watch. And so to be able to sit with someone and listen to, I mean, graphic stories of human cruelty, I felt like I was prepared. And some of the people in the facilitator body, they remember, because I was writing an email, oh my God, help me.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I was writing emails to them. I don't know, you know, God, oh my God, you know, like, you know, and so that was a way for me to clear myself. I would reach out to the facilitator body because I was kind of like by myself. I didn't have anybody to clear or to talk to, but every now and then I would just empty out and could be able to speak to the facilitators. And as Grace said earlier, I actually, how that project got started, I had a dream. And in the dream, I was in a beautiful green field and I saw 5 red chairs in a circle. And the voice said, you are to stand in this circle and listen to people. And so it was quite a while before I remember the dream. It was very vivid. It was almost like I woke up, it was like, wait a minute, where am I? And so one thing led to another. And I presented that project at the Global Conference for Transformation with Landmark Education as a poster, right, Glenn?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that was very successful. And that was sort of like the place I sort of kicked it off. And from there, I just started going to my local farmers market, put up the chairs and listening to people. And you could imagine, because I'm sure we have people here tonight who work in community. So you could imagine some of the stories that people have about what they're going through and what their life experiences are like. And so just sitting up chairs in the farmer's market, listening to people, they told me all of it. And some of the stories I heard, I couldn't believe that people were telling me these stories and they just met me for 2 seconds. And there were a couple of instances when the sharing was so deep that this farmer's market had about 20 tables in a circle with people selling stuff. There were a couple of instances that we were so close in talking that we looked up and all the farmers had packed up and left. And we didn't even notice they had packed up and left. So listening is a very profound space. And I will say that my ability to listen comes from a lot of different places where I was able to practice and bring consciousness, even being in Vipassana meditation, silent retreat for 10 days, being able to just sit and just be and not have any judgment. The distinction, no right way to be. You know, people can share anything. And I mean, after some of the stories I heard in Rwanda, I know that I can listen to anything. And I know that I can forgive anything. I met this woman who lived next door to the people who massacred her family. And I asked her, I said, how can you live next door to the people who massacred your family? Elegant woman, very sit up tall. And she thought about it. And she said, you know, sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm angry. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm just fine. She said, but every morning I wake up, I call my neighbor because we got to tend the garden because that's the garden that feeds this community. And she said, and when I look, and she said, when I really sit and look, she said, blood is on all of our hands. So we have to build for the future. She said, I can't look back. She said, some days it's almost like I can't get up, but I get up because I can't look back because I'm building for the future. And the people that I interviewed were people in that category. I interviewed people who the requirement is that they had to have gone through the genocide, and then they had to have come through the genocide and made a decision to be a contribution to their community. Mm. And so all of the people I interviewed were these grassroots leaders who you would never see in the newspaper or magazines or anything like that. But they were people who had a commitment and a purpose to fulfill inside of their community, and their commitment to having their community and their country get to the other side of what happened there.
You know, Ren, I just want to let people know the dynamics of it. So basically there are two chairs facing each other, and Rain sat in one and had them sit in the other chair, and a red chair, and allowed them to say whatever was there. So she's done it in Rwanda, she's done it in Florida, she's done it lots of different places. But the point is, to be able to powerfully listen to people where they're coming from and what they're up to empowers them. You know, we talked a lot about trauma earlier on, and sometimes, and I think the woman that you talked about in Rwanda was one of the first times that she had even shared some of the things, hadn't shared it with anybody. And the first time to share it was with you, because you had a space for her to speak what she had never spoken to anyone in the world.
Many of the people I interviewed, they had never shared their story in its entirety with anyone. And some of them have never shared their story at all with anyone.
Amazing.
And can you imagine that after all of those years, that to hold that? Mm-hmm. And so it's similar in the summit, when people feel like there's a safe space, either in their small group or in the big room where they can share and people listen, then it's healing. I was going to say it's therapeutic, but it's not therapy, okay? But it's healing.
Healing.
Yes, it is.
You know,
and it's not different from if you go to any of the traditional communities that still practice in a traditional way, they listen to each other. You know, I've studied cultures where there was a conflict in the community. The whole community came and sat in a circle, and it was a silent, what do they call it? Silent conflict resolution. They sat together in circle in silence. And when the person was complete, they got up and left. And one by one, and nobody ever said a word. But when you were complete, that means you were clear that this conflict was over for you. You could get up and leave. So the way that some things are handled, you know, traditionally, you know, we have other ways of doing things that aren't the Western way. And so the summit isn't necessarily the Western way. We have a whole thing about time in the summit. It starts when it starts. It may not look like what you think starting looks like, but it started. And I don't want to get into a whole nother distinction, self-generation, but y'all got to do the prerequisite. Talk to Nancy and Teresa.
So, you know, I'm clear that the work that you do, your listening project, is inside of your vision. I'm clear. So I wanted to ask you, Rain, what's your vision? Your vision for the Black community and the world.
Why did you ask me that question?
It's inside of the purpose of the summit, you know, bringing an opportunity.
See, that's a trigger question.
Their vision for the Black community and the world.
Um, how do I put this? You know, I'm still working that out for myself, because whatever I think about, I think it comes from the past notion of what it meant to be in the Black community and what that was, and what it meant to be in the world and what that was. So I've expanded.
Mm.
And so, you know, how I was raised, the community that I was raised in, that I can remember as a kid, I felt safe. It was beautiful. I felt like I was in a natural environment. Nature was present. I was involved with the church. So there was the church family. We had neighbors that talked to each other and brought each other vegetables and switched with the garden kind of stuff. You know, my dad, he ran the first food bank before they were calling it a food bank, feeding people who needed whatever they needed. My mom was a spiritual mother in the church, you know, raising her all of them raising their children together. So my experience of community was community. And then when we moved to Philadelphia, there was still like a sense of community, but it was different. It was a little harder. You know, it wasn't as soft and nurturing, but they had block parties. You know, they had times when it's Saturday, so everybody block off the street and you would paint your stoop and plant flowers and have music and all of that stuff going on, everybody doing it all at the same time. So there was like a sense of community. And now it's, for me, it's different. I don't know, some people may still have that, but with the gentrification, and I'm seeing it all over the country, the communities are kind of like broken up. Even here in Tallahassee, the place that you would call, that people would quote unquote call the hood, they totally moved all the people out and put them in different places. And that place is being totally torn down and they're building condos. You know, in Brooklyn, where I lived when I lived in New York, I mean, I went there recently and it was like brownstones. Some of the brownstones are still there, but they have these huge high rises. So anywhere you look, you're seeing these huge high rises. Harlem, you know, I knew that something was changing in Harlem when I walked down the street at 1 o'clock in the morning and I saw these 3 white teenagers just laughing and like, oh my God, and they weren't scared.
Mm.
So I have to reimagine my thoughts and concept of what it is to be in community.
You know, it's interesting, as somebody who grew up in Canada and still lives in Canada, you know, my parents are Jamaican. And so my notion of the Black community on television, you know, growing up and seeing the Black community in TV shows. And I was like, well, where's that? Like, we don't have that here. Like, what's that like? You know, so to even have that in your history feels wonderful to be able to have had that, you know.
And you know, now that you say that, I think that was what was my grief when I came to the first summit in 1992, I didn't experience that anymore. Mm-hmm. I didn't experience community. So I think that was my internal, and I think maybe, it's a big maybe, that's what many people of African descent walk around with, that grief. So for me, the summit was like, you know how some people share their first time going to the continent? When they see all Black people running the banks and the supermarkets and it's all, they just like, oh my God, you know, Black people. Because when I was growing up, it was like the church. So you saw big masses of Black people doing stuff together. In my world, in my early professional life, when I was working in corporate world, I wasn't in no room with no whole bunch of Black people at one time. Usually I was the only Black person in the room. And to a certain extent, even now, a lot of the places that I go, and even some of my friends who work corporately, a lot of times they're the only one. And I'm like asking myself, how can you not have a person of color in here and not see that as a missing, as a breakdown? So I think, yeah, I just distinguished something that was in the background that's now in the forefront, that was that grief that I felt in that 1992 summit. And I'm a person who, I'm a highly sensitive person. So sometimes I feel other people's energy. And I thought about it a few years ago that in that summit, the reason why it was so intense for me is I was feeling the energy of everyone there. And so sometimes I feel that at the summit, and I just have to just sit and just, be with it. And I can look and see what's going on with people, and I just use that to support the facilitation of the space in a respectful way and inside of the distinctions of the summit facilitator body. But it's a very, very powerful space. It can be a very powerful space.
We've talked a lot about that first summit event that you attended back in 1992. And I'm just curious, was that your favorite summit event, or in terms of annual summit events, if you look back and you have looked at and identified one or two favorite annual summit events?
You'd like trying to ask somebody to pick their favorite child.
Yeah, pick your favorite child. I'll tell you, I have a favorite child.
I think most people.
I don't have any children, for those listening.
Most of the people who ask that question, if you ask anyone, they will say their first summit was their favorite one or the most powerful one. And for me, it was just like that summit. It was so many pieces of it that shifted my being that I will never forget it. There were so many aspects of it that shifted my listening of Black men, of Black women, of Black youth, of the community. I was cleared by the ancestors, okay?
Do you have a second place?
Oh my God. Kenya. Oh, and then South Africa. Oh my God. Jamaica. Oh my God.
Now you're just going to start listing every one.
It's just like, come on. Like the stuff that happened in Kenya, the stuff that where's Petal? The stuff that happened in South Africa, Jamaica. Oh, wow.
Did you attend
Baltimore?
Brazil?
Huh?
Did you attend the annual summit event in Brazil? That was my favorite.
Oh my God.
Brazil's my favorite.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's just like if you think about all of the summit events, there's always something that was like that grab you, like the of that summit.
Well, let me ask you this, Rain. We dwell in a question or an inquiry or
New York summit. Jesus, wow.
New York,
oh my God.
Wild. Are there any particular years where the inquiry declaration compelled you? Any of them come to mind that you remember that are more outstanding than maybe some of the others?
That, I can't really say that because I feel like each year there's something that's brought forward in that summit that is very powerful. So in Kenya, it was they had a Harambee.
Harambee, yes, I remember that.
And that's the summit where Trigger was distinguished, profoundly distinguished. And wow, and community was distinguished, and family was distinguished. You know, we had people stand up and say, you're not Black, you're American.
Yeah.
We are Africans, you're not African. If you want to call yourself African, maybe you're West African, because they're loud. We're more reserved here in Kenya. And then you have people go to the mic, dark woman from California. You don't get, like, no, you don't get to tell me that I'm not Black. That's not gonna work. Light skin, light eyes. When that heifer told me that I wasn't Black, I wanted to, I was getting ready to come over there and, you know, and then the elder, you know, different versions of our self-expression. And I think that some of the Kenyans, their mind was blown. They were like, oh, we're sorry. Welcome home, we got it. Welcome home. And then the youth stood up and just blew it out of the water when he said, so you say you're African, you say you're our family, why are you staying in the hotel? Because when our family comes here, they don't stay in the hotel, they stay with us. And I think it was 47, it was either 43 or 47 people who checked out of the hotel and moved in with families. Yeah. And there was one couple, it was like a mirror family, husband, wife, and daughter. They left their daughter in Kenya after the summit to be with her family. Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of thing happened, like, you know, and we were treated like the kings and queens we are. There was one woman who, she invited us to the home for a feast, and there was a procession of Maasai that made a hallway, and we walked through there as they were singing to us. Wow. And we were like, wow, oh, look at this. Wow, she sent the bus. So how can you say that summit, the one summit was better than that? And in South Africa, the journey we took on Thursday night, they said we completed the Middle Passage. We completed the Middle Passage. That summit was like, whoa. Because some of the people were going to some of the Truth and Reconciliation hearings.
Oh, this is South Africa, okay.
They were going to the Truth and Reconciliation hearings and just hearing about all of that trauma. And then people coming into the summit to process it. Some of the, what they call street children coming to the summit. And I just never forget, this young man stood up and he said, I thought that the only way that we could heal things in South Africa was through violence. He said, now I know there's another way. I was born today. He said, I was born again out of my participation in the summit. He said, I have a new life. How do you say that, you know, compare like one summit is better than that summit is better than that summit?
Lots of,
you know, I'll say that what I'm present to right now is Lorraine Warren, the summit historian, because I know that you were the summit historian for, you know, a number of years. And I was not at the Kenya summit. I was not at the South Africa summit. So as you share this history, I'm present, and you share it so vividly, you know, that I'm really present to that being a natural role for you, summit historian. So thank you for
well, when I share too, I'm very careful not to share somebody else's story, but I'm just giving you a sense of, you know, what happened in those summits that were so powerful, where you had leaders just stand up and say, look, you know, that question, who must I be to transform the Black community in the world? You know, who am I being in the Black? Yeah, I'm out of integrity. You know, I'm out of integrity with my family, with my congregation, with my job. And so I could point out there and say, it's those people, but really it's me.
Well, Rain, now I know we got to get at least one or two funny stories, funny summit stories. I know you have a bunch of them, preferably the clean ones.
Uh-oh, I don't know.
So give people a taste of a funny story or an occurrence or an insight that you got that just has you tickled even today.
Well, the one I will go back to Kenya.
Okay.
And in Kenya, I won't say any names, but if they were here, they would say their name. Somebody had a challenge with the ATM and their check not being deposited on time. So they were deficient in funds. And somehow, I don't know how it got into the room that someone needed support. And then when that person needed support, somebody else needed support and somebody else needed. And so then they started the Save the Black America Fund,
yes.
Save the African American Fund. And it was this gentleman, I don't know his name, but he was so funny. He was the person who led the Harambe.
Harambe, yes. Mm-hmm.
And so he stood in front of the room and it was like an auction, but not really an auction. So basically they were asking people to come up and make contributions. And so when you came up and made your contribution, he will hold it up and say, is this all? You can't do any better than that. Oh, we need to help these Black Americans out. And then so people would, when you came up to give something, you had to announce how much you gave. And so he was just joking and laughing with people. And then he said, okay, you don't have any money. What do you have? So people were like, I have these shoes. I have this purse. And everybody who came up, he just made so much joy, so much fun. Everybody was taken care of. And by the end of it, everyone was taken care of. But that probably was one of the most joyful experiences I had in the summit, because we were holding our stomach laughing. But in the summit, there's always laughter. And I must give my props to Shakesha.
Yes.
You got to know Shakesha. She's such an extraordinary person. I remember, and the people who are there, if you can imagine 300 people sitting in the room, right? Shakesha, what is she, about 5 feet?
5'1" or 2.
She came, the summit was kind of like settled, people were sharing. Shakesha walks down the middle of the aisle with a huge, big, it was do you remember that, Glenn? Mm-hmm. A huge, gigantic church hat on. She slowly walks down the middle of the aisle and everybody just like broke down laughing. The way she did it. Oh my goodness.
So
you just never know how the laughter is going to show up.
And the dancing and the music.
Yes. The dancing and the music is all part of it. And I just want to underline that this was the same summit that they said that you're not really Black folks. So that's where the conversation started. But then there was so much love and bonding
in
that space in Kenya that we had the Harambe and all of this fun about the poor Black Americans that didn't have any money and fundraising, and the Africans are fundraising as well.
For the Americans, yeah.
The Americans. So, it speaks to the transformation that occurred inside of the space, inside of the relationships. So, we talk about nurturing relationships in the Declaration. We talk about funding our community in the Declaration, supporting our youth. All of these dynamics keep showing up every annual summit event. So all of the stuff that we talk about, and we're going to repeat the Declaration at the end of this conversation, but all of those dynamics come into play during the annual summit event, as well as the courses, the prerequisite. There's a community course that we're designing as well. So those elements and the vision come into play. Go ahead, Rain.
But the whole thing about it too, in the summit, you don't know where your breakthrough or where your profound moment will come. And I'm just hesitating because I don't want to tell nobody else's story. So you never know. I think I could call out Latasha Brown.
Mm-hmm.
When I was, the first time, I think this was Latasha's first summit.
Latasha is here, so
I
I don't
see
know
her.
if she can
When
raise her hand if it's okay for you to share.
Oh, it's okay. Latasha,
Okay, she raised her hand, so it looks
yeah,
like it's okay
when
for you to share this.
Latasha stood up, right? When she stood up and started singing,
Yes.
I saw the Underground Railroad. I saw the Civil Rights Movement. I saw the Middle Passage. It was just like her toning in her voice. I was just like, oh, I smelled the magnolia trees. Woo! I was like, Lord, I was done. I was like, I could get up right now, pack my stuff. My summit is over. I'm done, you know? And it's interesting, you know, sometimes it can be very subtle. And I think it was Birmingham, Alabama. I'll call out Alcil Randolph. For the Thursday night event, we had all of these civil rights icons share their story. So powerfully share their stories. And I could sense in the room that I felt like they felt heard, they felt proud. But I was talking to Alcil and I was like, I got it. I'm making a connection right here in this moment, the grief. Because I was left like incomplete. I felt like they shared their story and I felt like perhaps, maybe, these are people who they've done so much for the Black community. In their youth, they were the people who were on the streets, holding signs, getting hosed down by water hose, you know, fighting the power. And now they're elders. Some of them on fixed incomes, some of them not, some of them okay, some of them not okay. So they get a chance to stand up in the summit and be listened to, like, this is my journey. Some of them, you couldn't get them off that stage. It's like, okay, your time's up. Hello. They couldn't stop because they had so much they wanted to share. And I was like, wow. I saw something I never saw before. That maybe some of those people still are walking around with that trauma. Some of them still live in the Black community. And the very people, I think I shared this with Latasha, the very people who they fought for could be the people who take their life.
Yeah.
And so they have no idea who, when they walk by an elder, they have no idea who they're walking by and who that person was for them and why they have some of the privilege they have because of that elder that you walked by and saw the discount.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a deep look at that perspective, you know. And I'm just looking because I'm about to ask you what might also be a deep question as we look to wrap up. I'm not sure if Glenn has another question, but the question that I have for you as we wrap up is whether or not you have one or two wishes for the world right now.
Well, I don't know about you, but in many ways, the the COVID situation has cramped my style. Because I used to travel, like I would be gone at least out of the country at least maybe 2-3 times, at least one at least, definitely once a year. And I haven't really traveled because of COVID. And I actually am having a breakthrough here tonight out of just being with you all and sharing, that I would love to look at that summit purpose. The purpose of the International Black Summit is to provide an opportunity for participants to bring into being their vision for the Black community in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That I want to really look at that and see where I stand with it. Because many times, to be honest with you, when they say, what is your vision for the Black community? I didn't have one. Now, what is my vision for the world? It really has something to do with creating a world that listens.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's so much power in the listening. And, you know, some people will say I'm an expert. I am when I am listening. When I ain't, you know. But it's something really powerful about just listening. And listening doesn't necessarily mean you're always quiet. I mean, we saw some demonstration in the past summit where and I won't say people are not, but my assessment is the listening was so powerful that person saw who the other person was, and the other person got that person got them. So then they could listen and hear a possibility of contribution. And that was, for me, that was pure listening.
Mm-hmm.
That if I could listen to you so profoundly that whatever there is for me to say to you, to have you get a possibility, bam, that's powerful.
Great.
And then sometimes, you know, in the summit, it's facilitation. The person says what they have to say. They sit down and no one said a word to them and they got something for themselves. So it's no right way to be in the summit. It's no right way to facilitate. There's no formula. And there's listening. There's no formula. And it's not, we fuss, we fight, we disagree, we're human, profoundly human. And I think there's a spirit of care. You know, I wouldn't wish any harm to anyone, you know, just wanting everybody to be well. So that's a vision, that everybody's well, everyone's taken care of. You know, the vision of the expression of our spirituality.
Yeah.
Ending the murders of our men, women, and children. Building economies responsible for funding our community. Maintaining wellness of being in our bodies. Providing human services. Establishing nurturing relationships. Altering the conversation of who we are in the media. Empowering our youth. Got it. Oh, something like that for the world. You know, that everybody gets to express their spirituality. No one has to walk around feeling afraid, you know, that they're gonna get stopped or murdered or blah, 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 blah. People got money, people are healthy. You know, people have the services that they need. It's all good. Was there ever a time when it was that way and we moved away from that? I don't know.
Rain, what would you say to someone that hasn't done the International Black Summit
They've never done the summit? What would I
Never
say
done the
about
summit.
what?
What would you say to invite them or to let them know what they might get out of the summit? So I'm looking at, somebody's invited me. I don't know anything about the summit. What would you say to that person?
Well, I'll say what I said. This one person asked me one time, oh, I want to come to the summit. Who are the speakers? I said, you are the speaker. I would say in the summit, you might be the person who stands up and shifts everything for the entire room, therefore the entire planet. So in the summit, we listen for what's in the space. What's in the space? Don't be afraid to come. Go to the prerequisite. You'll get up to speed like you've been there for 30 years. You get foundation and grounded in the distinctions so you can listen authentically to the conversation going in the room. And if you have something to say, stand up, raise your hand and say it. Fear not, because whatever you say might be the very thing that's needed. Often that person's sitting there quiet, especially when it's an alignment conversation. I'm like, please, whoever spirit is talking to, would you please say something so we could go home? Don't have to be here till 5 o'clock in the morning. And the person is trembling and oh, I got something to say. And they say it and it opens the whole room up. And there's like freedom. It could be a child, it could be an elder, anything in between that, what do you have to offer? What are you bringing? And maybe that's the space to just be that and say that. And I'm just being led to say, I've been in this space too, people who are triggered by the summit. There's something that's stopping them from coming. They're like, I went to the summit, I ain't coming no more. Those people, blah, 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 and I'm not coming back to the summit. Wow. What's your vision?
Yes.
What are you up to in your life? What could you bring that could shift everything? And there's nothing to do except be. I was so happy to come to the summit and not have any accountabilities, because the last summit I went to, I had I've lost count of how many accountabilities. I said, I will never do that again. And I came to the summit, I had my group, we talked, I had fun, I was playing around, I had fun. Oh, and it was virtual. So I was home, and I want to shout out to these brothers that I saw in the summit. Well, it was Brian, powerful sharing. And then after the summit, I looked you up. And I'm putting I'm taking the liberty to put 4 Elements United YouTube channel. Please, everybody go and join that. They have profound conversations about consciousness and Black men. And that's who we have in the summit. People who are elders in the summit, people who are out in the community making things happen. So you're with some people say that I've invited to the summit over the years. They say, oh, wow, I've never been in a room full of so many positive Black people.
Yeah.
People who were up to something. So in the summit over the years, we've had people get married. We've had people get divorced. We've had people start businesses by themselves or sometimes together. We've had a couple of summit babies when we were in person. The virtual, I don't know. But so all kinds of possibilities have happened through people coming to the summit.
Great.
And I will say another thing, for myself, and I know some other people had similar experience. Participating in a summit accountability is a growth and leadership opportunity. So you get a chance to be triggered. You get a chance to bump up against things. You also get a chance to develop leadership, and And as far as I can see, it's still wide open for you to come and make your contribution and just develop yourself as a leader, and also bring to the summit your gift and what you have to contribute. And really, this is going back to your question, Grace. I don't know when it will happen, but I see that the summit, the International Black Summit, will become a household name, that it will be known around the world, like Facebook, YouTube, like any entity that's in the world making a contribution, that it will be. Its time has come, and its time will come. And so I feel like those bodies that can be facilitators, that can be leaders in the administration and development of the summit, the conversation and the building blocks that have it operate effectively as an organization, will be, I hate to use the word needed, will be called for. And so that's what I would say, if people, you feel yourself in your spirit to contribute in any way, it's a wonderful training ground. And it's a wonderful ground to contribute and to provide a service to the Black community. And that's why I've participated in the summit for so many years. I hear my high school English teacher, Mrs. Young, that's how she said her name. She said, always, Miss Warren, have a spiritual institution that you participate in, have a, what was the other one? Spiritual institution, have an institution where you're developing yourself, your knowledge and your wisdom, and have an institution where you are contributing back to your community. So for me, the summit was a way that I can contribute back to my community.
Great.
I've always followed that. High school English teacher, Mrs. Young. So I've always been involved with something.
Well,
Mrs.
thank
Young said
you
it.
to Mrs. Young. We thank Mrs. Young, and we thank you, Dr. Lorraine Warren, for being with us this evening. Thank you so much for spending this time sharing with us, having fun, laughing with us tonight, and just really giving some food for thought for me as somebody who's been a participant in the International Black Summit, giving me information that I'd never heard before, new perspectives, and for people who are fresh and who are learning about us new, giving them an opportunity to hear a perspective on the International Black Summit. So if you're listening and you do want to find out more, you can find out more about us at our website, www.blacksummit.org. www.blacksummit.org. Dr. Rain might have interested you in finding out about our courses, the prerequisite course, which is not only limited to the annual summit event. We do have and can have prerequisite courses at any time of the year. So you can find out about that on the website. We also have the Power of Community Transformation course. You can find out about that on the website, as well as our primary annual summit event each year. So go to the website, find out more, or if you want to ask about it, you can contact us through the contact page and actually identify by clicking on which topics you want to hear back from us on. So we hope you'll be in communication with us. And so now, as we close out the podcast,
Well, I just want to thank Rain, knowing her all these years. Thank you for the many contributions that I know about, and so many more that I have no idea. You've shifted the consciousness of the planet, and you're a caregiver to your mom. There's so many things that you contribute to your family, to your nieces and nephews. Over the years, I've gotten to know you and appreciate who you are as a leader, as a woman, as a Black woman that is not afraid to say what's necessary and what may not necessarily be in vogue, but needs to be said, and you'll say it. And so
Yeah.
thank you for your partnership. Thank you for the love that you are to all of us, and to the Black community, International Black Summit, and the world. And it is so great to have you again. Love and blessings to you and all that you touch. Appreciate you.
Thank you. And I will say my closing words is that the summit is not about one person. The summit is about community. You know, anything that I've contributed to the summit or anyone has contributed to the summit, it's been done in community. It's been done inside of the collective of what we contribute when we are all together. Everybody does some part of it. And hey, it's all in the circle. I know one of the things I've appreciated over the years, I could pick up the phone and have a clearing conversation with so many different kinds of people with so many different skills. So come on.
Come on and check it out.
Come join us. Come join us. Come join us. And if you're not listening and participating live and you'd want to join a future podcast recording live, you can do that and find out about that on the website as well. Because we're going to close the podcast recording out now, but we're going to continue offline and have a Q&A session. So audience members get to join and ask questions now, but that part won't be recorded. So join us in the future if you'd like to do that.
Great. And
thanks for being with us.
And as Rain said, this is about community, and the declaration I'm about to read was created in community at that first International Black Summit in October 7th, 1991, as a collective of the people that were there. So without further ado, the declaration of the International Black Summit. We declare ourselves, our community, and all communities whole and complete. There's nothing to do except be. We assert that we are responsible for generating community as possibility and distinction. We listen for and grant being to the possibility and creation of unpredictable results. Our conversation of, about, and for those of African descent is one of power, self-generation, abundance, responsibility, unity, and integrity, with the possibility of being. We stand for the expression of our spirituality, ending the murders of our men, women, and children, building economies responsible for funding our community, maintaining wellness of being in our bodies, providing human services, establishing nurturing relationships, altering the conversation of who we are in the media, empowering our youth. We declare that our community manifests itself in the world as a contribution in the transformation of the universe. Atlanta, Georgia, October 7th, 1991. Today's date is August 14th, 2022. And one of the traditions that we do is we have a moment of silence, but we include to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west, and wherever people of Black African descent reside, we're going to take a moment of silence, please. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.